My name is Dorothy May Calloway. I am 72 years old, and I spent 40 years keeping the books for Harmon's Hardware and Feed, right here in Lima, Ohio. 40 years of ledgers of columns that had to balance to the penny, of knowing that numbers do not lie even when people do. That is not a gift you are born with. It is a discipline you develop when you understand that the truth lives in the details, and that a single transposed digit can unravel everything you thought was sound. I kept every receipt I ever touched. I kept invoices and bank statements and the little paper slips from the register that most people throw in the trash the moment they leave the store. My kitchen has a drawer, and in that drawer are stacked black notebooks going back to 1984. Every cent in, every cent out, 40 years of habit, 40 years of believing that what happens deserves to be recorded. My husband Ronald passed when Kevin was 11 years old. A heart attack on a Wednesday morning in February, which is the kind of sentence that does not get easier to say no matter how many years go by. I was 41 years old, Kevin was in 6th grade, and I was suddenly the only thing standing between my child and the world. I went back to work the following Monday, not because I was strong, but because the alternative was not available to me. I kept the books at Harmon's through the rest of the school year and through the summer, and through every school year after that. I went to every parent-teacher conference alone. I packed every lunch and attended every school play and drove Kevin to every practice, and on Saturdays I worked the register when Ray Harmon needed extra help on the floor. I set aside whatever I could, a little at a time, because that is what you do when there is only one of you. Kevin called me on a Tuesday evening in January 2 years ago now to say he was engaged to a woman named Stephanie Hargrove. He was 40 years old. I had begun to quietly wonder if he would ever settle down, and when he told me I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized was held tight. I told him I was so happy. And I was. I asked him about her, and he told me about her family, how her father Gerald owned 3 car dealerships out on the east side, how her mother Patricia had gone to Ohio State, how they had a beautiful home in the newer part of town. I listened to all of this the way a mother listens when she is taking note of what her child is proud of. Kevin was proud of where Stephanie came from. I understood that. I just did not understand yet what it would cost. I offered to help pay for the wedding. He accepted before I had finished the sentence. There was not a pause, not even the small, polite hesitation that people offer when they are going to say yes but want it to look like they considered saying no. He simply said, "Yes, Mom, that would be wonderful." And then, in the same breath, in that careful tone he uses when he has already decided something and is only telling you after the fact, he said, "It's better if you stay in the background, Mom." Her family is very formal. I was standing in my kitchen when he said it. I had a cup of tea in my hand, chamomile, the kind I make in the evenings. It had been hot when I poured it. By the time I set it back down on the counter, it had gone cold. I said, "Of course, Kevin, whatever you think is best." And he said, "Great." And we talked about a few other things, and then we said, "Good night." And I stood in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up, looking at the cold tea, thinking about what the word formal meant when the person using it was your son. What Kevin did not know was that I had already visited Father Raymond Kowalski at St. Anthony of Padua 3 weeks before the ceremony. Father Kowalski has known me for 30 years. He baptized Kevin. He buried Ronald. He has sat across from me in that quiet side room off the sacristy more times than I can count. And there has never been a moment when he did not know exactly who I was. I sat in that room on a Friday afternoon in early October with the painting of St. Anthony on the wall and the faint smell of candle wax that the room always carries, and I placed a sealed white envelope on the table between us. My name was written on the front in my own handwriting. I said, "Father, during the acknowledgments at the reception, I was wondering if you would be willing to read what is inside." He did not reach for the envelope right away. He looked at me the way he looks at people when he is listening to more than the words. Then he said, "Leave it with me, Dorothy." I drove home on that clear October afternoon, and I felt for the first time since Kevin had said the word formal that I could breathe. Let me take you back to the beginning of how this was all arranged. I have always been a woman who keeps records. Not because I am suspicious or small-minded, but because I learned very young that memory is selective and numbers are not. When Kevin and I sat down to talk about what the wedding would actually cost, I opened a fresh page in my black notebook and I wrote down each item as it came up. Riverside Events Hall for the venue, $18,500. That included the room, the tables and chairs, the linen and the staff for the evening. The flowers, which Stephanie and I had discussed at some length at my kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, going through a catalogue the florist had sent over, $4,200. That was the arch of white roses and eucalyptus at the altar, the centerpieces for 20 tables, the flowers on the cake table, and the small arrangements on the gift table near the door. Stephanie's dress, which she had seen in a bridal magazine and pointed to without knowing whether it was practical to want it, and I told her it was because a woman wears her wedding dress exactly once and she ought to love it, $2,900 from a boutique in Columbus. The catering, $14,800, which included a full sit-down dinner for 180 guests, sweet tea and lemonade on the tables, a stationed buffet with chicken and carved beef for the main course, rolls and sides, and the wedding cake from a bakery in town that made a lemon cake with cream cheese frosting that Stephanie's mother had specifically requested. The band, a 5-piece group from Columbus that Kevin had seen perform at another wedding and liked, $3,800. The invitations, the programs on heavy cream cardstock with the gold foil edge, the place cards, and the table numbers, $650. I added the column carefully. The total was $44,850. I wrote that number at the bottom of the page and drew a line under it. Then I looked at it for a moment, the way I had looked at so many numbers over 40 years at Harmon's, checking not just the arithmetic, but the shape of the thing, the proportion of the parts to the whole, the question of whether this was a number that told a true story. It did. I closed the notebook. Kevin never called to acknowledge the transfers. Each payment went out by bank transfer, and the receipts arrived in my email, one after another, over the course of the following 12 months, the venue deposit in November, the venue balance in March, the florist deposit in December, the florist balance in late September, the caterer in 2 installments, the dress in February after the alterations were final, the band deposit in January, the balance in August, the printer in July. I printed each receipt and tucked it carefully into the pocket inside the back cover of my black notebook. Not to keep score, not to have ammunition. I kept them because they represented something real that had happened, and real things that happened deserve to be written down. That is the only philosophy I have ever operated by. The printed ceremony program arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks before the wedding date. Kevin had mailed it to me, I think, so that I could see what the order of service would be. It was printed on heavy cream cardstock, the same material as the invitations, with the gold foil edge. It was genuinely beautiful. I sat down at my kitchen table with my reading glasses on, and I went through it page by page. The processional, which would begin with a piece of classical music Kevin had chosen. The scripture readings, 2 of them, from Corinthians and from Ruth. The exchange of vows. Then a page, titled Special Acknowledgements. The program thanked Gerald and Patricia Hargrove for their gracious contribution to the celebration of their daughter's marriage. It noted specifically that they had provided the bridal bouquet. I thought about this for a moment. The bridal bouquet had been ordered through the same florist I had paid. I had seen the estimate. The bridal bouquet, which was a loose arrangement of white garden roses and trailing greenery that Stephanie had chosen herself, had cost $210. $210 out of $44,850. The Hargroves were credited in the printed program that would be handed to every one of the 180 guests, in the program that would sit in people's pockets and purses and on the seats of their cars for weeks afterward. My name was not on the program. Not in the acknowledgements, not in any line, on any page. I read through it twice to be certain I had not missed something. I had not missed something. I closed the program and set it on the table next to my black notebook. I opened the notebook and I wrote down the date, and next to the date I wrote the word absent. 1 week before the wedding, Kevin called again. His voice had that quality it gets when he has thought through what he wants to say and then thought through it again. Careful, measured. The voice of a man who is managing rather than talking. "Mom," he said, "you'll be at table 12 at the reception, okay? It'll be more comfortable for you there, away from all the noise up front." I had seen a diagram of the seating arrangement. Table 12 was at the back of the hall, near the window that looked out on the parking lot. It was the last table in the row. Then he said, "And you really don't need to worry about giving a speech or anything. I know you don't like speaking in public." That was not true. I had delivered the eulogy at Ronald's funeral when I was 41 years old, and I had held my voice steady through every word of it. Kevin had been there. He had sat in the front pew and listened to me speak about his father for 6 minutes without breaking, and afterward 3 different people told me it was the finest eulogy they had heard. Kevin knew I could speak in public, but I said, "Of course, Kevin, whatever you think is best." I put the phone down on the counter, and I stood very still in my kitchen for a moment, and then I thought about the envelope sitting in Father Kowalski's desk drawer at St. Guy, Anthony's, and I went to make myself another cup of tea. Have you ever been made invisible by someone who should have seen you? Not a stranger, not an acquaintance, but the one person in the world who had the most reason to put your name first. The one who knew every sacrifice you had made, who had sat at your kitchen table and eaten your food and called you when he needed help, who had accepted $44,850 without blinking and then quietly arranged for you not to appear anywhere in the event that money was building. If that is something you recognize, I want you to tell me in the comments, because what happened next changed every understanding I had about what dignity looks like when it finally arrives. On the morning of the wedding, I took my time getting ready. I put on my navy dress, the one with the cream buttons at the collar that I had bought the previous spring and worn only once, to a retirement party for a woman I had worked with for 20 years. I wore the pearl earrings Ronald had given me on our 15th wedding anniversary, which we had almost not had because the money was so tight that year. He had saved for 4 months without telling me, a little from each paycheck, tucking it into an envelope in his sock drawer. And on the morning of our anniversary, he handed me a small box from the jewelry counter at the department store downtown. I have worn those earrings on every important occasion since he died. I called a taxi because no one had thought to ask if I needed a ride. I sat in the back of the cab with my purse on my lap, watching Lima go by through the window, the familiar streets I had driven for 4 decades, and I thought about all the Saturdays and all the evenings and all the packed lunches and all the overtime hours that had accumulated into the $44,850 I had sent, transfer by transfer, to build an event I would be attending from Table 12. I arrived at St. Anthony of Padua at 2:30. The ceremony was scheduled for 3. I walked in through the side entrance because no one had arranged for anyone to meet me at the main doors. The church was beginning to fill, and people were moving through the narthex in the way people move at weddings, speaking quietly and looking for familiar faces. And I found my way inside and took a seat near the back, which felt fitting under the circumstances. The afternoon light came through the stained glass above the east windows and fell in long colored panels across the floor of the nave, gold and blue and rose, and for a moment the beauty of it was enough, just the light and the quiet and the faint smell of candle wax, the same smell as the side room where I had sat with Father Kowalski in October. I watched Kevin stand at the altar while Stephanie walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Her dress was the one from the magazine, ivory with a cathedral train, and it moved exactly as it was supposed to, the way a dress moves when it is made well and altered carefully to the body of the woman wearing it. She was genuinely radiant. I thought about the afternoon at the Columbus boutique, the fitter kneeling with pins in her mouth, Stephanie turning slowly in front of the 3-way mirror, and the exact expression on her face when she looked at herself in that dress for the first time. I had been there for that moment. I had paid for what caused it, and I was glad. Father Kowalski performed the ceremony with the gentle authority of a man who has married hundreds of couples and buried their parents and baptized their grandchildren, who understands that the words of a wedding ceremony are not decoration but architecture. The frame inside which 2 people are going to try to build something. He does not rush. He never has. Kevin's voice was steady through the vows. Stephanie's broke a little on the phrase, "to love and to cherish," and she laughed softly at herself and continued, and there was something in that moment, something true and unguarded that made me love her a little in spite of everything. Before the ceremony began, Kevin moved through the hall greeting people, And when he passed near table 12, he caught my eye and gave me a quick smile, the kind that does not reach the eyes, the kind that says, "I see you, and I am relieved you are here, and now please stay quiet." I smiled back. I meant my smile. They were married. The hall filled with applause, and I clapped with everyone else, and I meant every bit of it. Stay with me, because what happened next was the only gift I needed that day. After the first dance and the toasts, Father Kowalski stepped to the small podium that had been placed at the front of the hall, just to the left of the main table. He thanked everyone for joining the celebration. He spoke briefly about what it means for a community to gather around a new marriage, the way a village used to gather, the way a parish still does. And then he said that he had been asked to read a special acknowledgement on behalf of one of the guests. He reached into the inner pocket of his vestment. He removed the white envelope, the one I had placed on the table in the side room in October, the one with my name written in my own handwriting on the front. The seal had not been broken. He broke it then, quietly, in front of everyone, and he unfolded the single page inside, and he put on his reading glasses, and he began to read. He read my full name, Dorothy May Calloway. He read Riverside Events Hall, $18,500 paid in full. He read the flowers and decorations, $4,200. He read the catering for 180 guests, $14,800. He read the wedding dress, $2,900. He read the band, $3,800. He read the invitations and printed programs, $650. Then he read the total, $44,850. He said this celebration was funded in its entirety by Dorothy May Calloway, the groom's mother, from her personal savings built over 40 years of work. He folded the page and returned it to the envelope. He said, "We are grateful for this extraordinary gift of love." The hall was very quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that happens when 180 people all arrive at the same understanding at the same instant. I did not stand up. I kept my hands folded in my lap, and I sat very still at table 12, because everything I had come to do was already done. I had not planned a confrontation. I had not planned a speech or a gesture. The envelope had been in Father Kowalski's desk since October, and I had not touched it since, had not added to it, had not second-guessed it. The truth had its own address, and it had arrived without me needing to carry it. Kevin had gone very pale. I could see him from the back of the hall, standing at the main table, and the color had simply left his face in the space of a few seconds. Stephanie was beside him, perfectly still, and she was not looking at Father Kowalski. She was looking at her husband with an expression I could not fully read from where I sat, but which did not look like surprise so much as the arrival of a confirmation she had not known she was waiting for. Gerald Hargrove, who had been seated at the first table with his wife and their family, turned slowly in his chair. Then he stood. Gerald Hargrove is a tall man, 6'2" or so, with silver hair and the posture of someone who has spent a lifetime standing across counters from people and meaning what he says. He walked the full length of the hall, from the first table to the last table, from the very front of the room to table 12 at the very back, and every person in that hall watched him do it. When he reached me, he extended his hand. He said, "Ma'am, the ceremony was beautiful. Thank you." I shook his hand. I said, "It was my pleasure, Mr. Hargrove. Your daughter is a lovely bride." He nodded, the way a man of his generation nods when he has understood something he feels he should have understood sooner, and then he walked back to his table. Kevin tried to say something after that, something light, some small remark meant to take the air out of the moment and let the evening continue without the weight of what had just happened sitting on every table. It did not land. People were polite because it was a wedding, and people at weddings are generally polite. But the evening had changed. I could feel it from where I sat. The band played, and I ate my dinner, which was the chicken. I had asked the caterer months ago if they could include a chicken and dumpling option alongside the carved beef because it was a dish that had always meant Sunday dinner in my family. The kind of thing my own mother made when she wanted the house to feel like a place people wanted to be. The caterer had said, of course, and there it was, on the buffet at table 12's end of the room, warm and exactly right. My friends from St. Anthony's, 3 women I had known for 20 years or more, sat with me, and we talked the way old friends talk at events where things have happened. quietly and with the ease of people who no longer need to explain themselves to each other. About a week later, a woman I know slightly from the parish telephoned me. She had been seated near the front of the hall, near the Hargrove family, and she told me that the morning after the wedding, Stephanie had confronted Kevin directly. The question, as it came to me, was exactly this: your mother paid for everything and you put her at table 12? I was told that Kevin did not have a good answer for this, and that the conversation had continued at some length, and that the people who had been at that wedding and had heard Father Kowalski read the list of figures aloud were not going to forget what they had heard, and that the social arithmetic of the situation had shifted in ways that Kevin had not calculated when he drew up the seating chart. 3 weeks after the wedding, Kevin came to my house on a Saturday morning. I had made coffee, he sat at my kitchen table and he cried, which I had not seen him do since his father's funeral, and I sat across from him and I let him, because that is what mothers do even when their children have done something that cost them more than they know how to say. When he was finished, I said, "Kevin, I know that you love me." He said, "Yes." I said, "But love is not hiding your mother in the back corner of a room she built because she embarrasses you in front of people you want to impress. Love is not accepting someone's life savings and then arranging for their name to appear nowhere in the event those savings made possible." He was quiet for a long time. He looked at his hands on the table. Then he asked what I needed, and I said, "I need you to understand that I am not a problem to manage. I am a part of your life. When you understand that, truly understand it, the door will be open. It has always been open. It is open right now." I meant every word. The door was not closed. I was his mother, and the door was not closed. What I remember most about that day, though, is not Gerald Hargrove walking the length of the hall. It is not Kevin's face when Father Kowalski read the last line. What I remember most is a 7-year-old girl named Emma, who is the daughter of Kevin's cousin Linda, and who had been seated at a small children's table near the back of the hall, not far from table 12. Emma was wearing a white dress with a pink sash, and her hair was done up with little white flowers in it, and she had spent most of the ceremony sitting very correctly in her chair, the way small children do when they have been told to behave and are genuinely trying. When Father Kowalski finished reading and the hall was quiet for that one long moment, Emma slid off her chair and ran across the polished floor in her little white shoes, and she climbed up onto the seat beside me and took my hand in both of hers, and she said, "Grandma Dorothy, the priest said your name." She said it the way children say things that are true, without hesitation, without any awareness that it was complicated, just the plain shining fact of it. "The priest said your name." "Yes, sweetheart, he did. He said it very clearly so that everyone could hear. I am 72 years old. I kept the books at Harmon's Hardware and Feed for 4 decades. I raised a son alone after burying his father at 41. I saved $44,850, one careful deposit at a time, and I gave every cent of it to a wedding, and the man whose wedding it was placed me at table 12 and left my name off the program. And what I learned is this: whoever tries to erase you from a room you built ends up being erased by the room itself. Being 72 years old is not being invisible. It is knowing exactly what you are worth, and having the patience, built over decades, to let the truth arrive on its own, without rushing it, without forcing it, without ever raising your voice. When I got home that evening, I opened my black notebook at the kitchen table. I wrote down the date. I wrote down what Father Kowalski had read. I wrote down what Gerald Hargrove had said when he shook my hand. Then I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer with all the others, 40 years of records, everything true, everything counted, and I looked out the window at the yard where Kevin used to ride his bicycle on summer evenings, and I thought about Ronald, and I thought, I am still here. I have always been here, and I am not going anywhere. If your family has ever treated you like a burden or made you feel like a background detail in your own story, I want you to tell me about it in the comments below, because you are not alone in this, not even a little bit.